We have Professor Nassir Marrouche from University of Utah in Salt Lake City. And first I have to say that we're neighbors, although we can't. He's originally from Lebanon and I'm originally from Israel, so we're neighbors, but we can't visit each other on our own turf. We have to go to a third country to do so.
Come to St. Louis.
Anyway, Nassir is really well known for pushing the envelope on combining imaging and electrophysiological approaches to the treatment of arrhythmias. And I feel, and in particular, MRI scar imaging of the atria, which is something that he pioneered, as a guide to substrate-based ablation for atrial fibrillation. So that's a new contribution. And in general, in his CARMA Institute, which is trying to really push technology and combine imaging with EP approaches in treatment of arrhythmias, they've done some beautiful work. Nassir received his MD, or did his MD, in Heidelberg in Germany, and then continued his training in a different place in Germany, then UCSF with Mel Scheinman, and finally in the Cleveland Clinic. And I have to say that we're in Cleveland at the same time, but we never met. I don't know how, because I thought I knew everybody.
You never went to the Italian place I went to. Or chicken wings place.
We didn't go to the same pubs.
That's the problem.
So anyway, without further ado, we're welcoming you.
I had a great day so far and great dinner yesterday. First time in St. Louis, Kansas City, St. Louis, and Wisconsin. I've never been to this country. And I was impressed with this beautiful town. As impressed I was today when the whole day, starting in the morning with the imaging team at the hospital and Phil and showing what he's doing. But to be honest, one of the things I learned in my life, you always surround yourself with people who are smart like this in your life. And today, after I walked to this place here, in this building, I have a meeting with Euron's students, and most of them are here, and I felt I have no idea what I'm doing. These people are so smart, and lucky you, is building this. But the difference between you and me, this is my disclosures, is that you surround yourself with the smart people, but you're as smart and maybe smarter than them. But the difference in my case, I surround myself with smart people who are smarter than me all the time. So that's the karma, you know, we get people from all over to Utah. Image processing, MRI specialists here, EP, outcome researcher, cardiologist to build the CARMA Center. And I want to start, usually I end this talk with thanking people, but in the last 6 months I'm starting my talk by thanking the people because they put this talk together. All the slides I'm showing is the work of these people at the CARMA Center. And I said again, I'm happy to be one of the students and I got invited. This is our website, please come and visit. And I think the work that we did in Utah, I like to start with this slide. One of the things that innovative was at the university, and the reason why we joined the University of Utah is they accepted to build us this scan, part of our package, the EP-MRI scan lab. This is an angio suite, and this is an MRI scanner. They connected, Siemens made this for us in 2008. You know, Euron was asking me if I get stereotaxis. We chose to get this one. I'm sorry, I'm not in St. Louis. To choose this lab because we knew we needed to look at substrate and so on with the dilemma of the years of AFib management and ablation. So that was not only the group, but we had the infrastructure to build for the last 8 to 9 years in EP and MRI. Let me start with the patient here, 77-year-old female, persistent AFib for 10 years. History of hypertension and LV dysfunction, ejection fraction of 40%. There's everybody in the room, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. Everybody knows what atrial fibrillation is, I assume, in this room, right? Everybody. Everybody knows what LV dysfunction is? Serious question. Everybody knows that? Good. So this patient have a persistent atrial fibrillation, and she has some symptoms. And if you ask, how to treat this patient for the guidelines today, so either send her to the surgeon, to Damiano, or it's very hard to treat her. AFib has been 10 years ongoing. She have a bad ventricle. But if you look at their substrate, her heart is really very well, what we call healthy blue, and there's little of green, which is fibrotic changes. I'll show you some example of one. So this patient today will be sent to a rate control because she's old. She have a treatment where we give them drugs or blood thinners and try to conservatively treat them. We don't treat them invasively because we think they'll never succeed. But I hope I show you later today that at the end of my lecture that this patient will profit a lot from a procedure, an ablation procedure, because it doesn't have much scarring, much fibrosis. This is patient number 2, young female, persistent AFib, 1 year duration and high blood pressure. Today, everybody will ablate this patient, right? Straightforward, young, the persistent AFib, symptomatic, they all be defined based on this ECG, but if you look at the heart, I'm skipping the slides here, you have a lot of fibrosis, a lot. I think this patient today, in my practice, I will send her to Damiano, although, to try to surgically at least work with her, because we all put our specific protocols, but because we are failing to really cure these progressed fibrotic patients in our hospital, at least from multicenter data. So that's the topic of my lecture today, how we use this image, what we learned over the year to treat our patient. So we're starting with how we image fibrosis and scar, and spend some time with your radiology, with Pam and her team in the morning. Impressive infrastructure. Tons of MRIs, tons of MRI times, and you should really take advantage of this, combining this as ECGI into one concept. This would be amazing. So this is what we're looking for. This is what we're trying to see with an MRI scan. This is what we're trying to image. You're doing great work in activation, on defining scar with ECGI. We're trying to do this with the substrate definition using MRI scanning. This is a patient from Amit Patel, one of our cardiac surgeons, the paper I published with Chris McGann. 3 types of patients with different biopsies. A lot of fibrosis, as you can tell here, little fibrosis, and healthy atrial tissue. And you subtract the muscles, you see this kind of extensive fibrosis here, this little, and this is normal. And this is what we're trying to image. Keep this in mind. As we go forward.
These are MRIs? These are MRI?
No, this is a histobiopsy. I want to show you the MRI later. I'll just get to. So, and this is part of my lecture, and this is a lecture. I'm glad this is the first time in a while I can't speak for an hour, because I usually have to speak 15 minutes or 20 minutes. By the way, speak on 15 minutes and you develop it. So imaging fibrosis and substrate, and this is important. We talked to your radiologist today. The same question comes up. MRI is one of, for me, I can't replace a super surgeon like this guy sitting here, but it's opening the chest, looking inside. I like to see that, and that's what MRI is allowing to do every day in and out of my practice. But it's all about the sequence that you use, and this is something we've been sharing now slowly but surely around the world, and hopefully we'll have it implemented here very soon, and how we process the image. Sorry, I missed that. This should supposed to be. The pictures doesn't want to work, obviously. We were so excited to show you the example. But look at this. This is a stock sequence, supposed to be a sequence from Siemens, which shows you that the standard Siemens, when you go to your magnet today in Barnes, and you run your MRI with the cardiac MRI, you see a sequence that doesn't differentiate the wall from each other. But this is the fibrosis sequence at the university in Utah. And you can really clearly delineate the atrial wall. And if you look at what we learned over the years, and this is important for you, we did the DCAF1 study, the study we published in JAMA. And we learned a lot from these 15 centers. I mean, great centers, in the United States to Europe. But what we learned is people will use different, this is MRI language, we use an imaging language, you correct T1 imaging or too short T1. and so on. But what we learned is that people think they have a great image. They run a sequence without correcting for specific criteria. And then Eugene Kamowski, who's been behind all this, if you have too short T1 versus correcting it, see how different the image is, the same patient. So there's small, like minor changes in the scanner where right click or writing a specific code that we implemented to fix all those. Or this is the wrong MR sequence with different navigator problems and artifacts. And then we learned a lot from the patients who are eligible for this. If your heart rate more than 120, we're not taking the MRI anymore. If you're obese, if your BMI high, more than 100, it is obviously more than 35, but these issues, we corrected them over the year to fix that sequence I told you about. And this is a summary. I can put the lights down. Yes, it's better. And this is a sequence. You see how beautiful, even this is for you when you valve. Look at this aortic valve. You can see it in this sequence. And look at the atrial wall. So this is, for us, that's why I'm showing the valve in this cut. It's not to doubt that we're seeing is really fibrosis. It's really tissue of the atrial wall, which is up to 2 to 4 millimeter thickness, as you all know. But you see, you have to run the sequence. This is the bottom line. And I continue talking about this in the world. And now we're having sessions in place where our physicists are going around the world to talk about this, just to implement the sequences. And we are talking to Bam today in the morning to bring it here to Barnes and to work with Phil and his team on this as well. So this is what we summarize in the paper. After 68 papers, is published a JAMA paper in a multicenter study, but summarize the approach. We take this image that I showed you, the sequence, the fibrosis sequence. And by the way, this is part of the cardiac package at the Siemens scanners now. It's called the Fibrosis Utah sequence. And Philips and GE are implementing this as we speak as well. But you process this with the CorView software, and the scale tells you here how deep the density across the wall based on that in the fibrosis image. And that's MRI scan. And this is a summary. Asked me this before your own, but this here corresponds. This is Amit Patel's work with Chris McGann, where they did biopsies from certain areas and correlated them with this finding in histology. So this was the coronary class. This is one, if you ask me, the work we did in Utah and the papers we published is one of the most important papers. We've got to get the surgeon, get imaging, and we get to understand at least roughly what we're dealing with when we see these images. This is important for the scientists in the room. I heard so much today, science and mathematics and equations and so on. And that's when you write the software to do the image processing, you need to reproduce it. And this is an important study. We're in the process of publishing, where we took 11 patients who had the MRI done within a week, repeated MRI within a week for multiple reasons, is to show that the fibrosis is intact and safe within a week period. And this is a patient within 8 days. You can see the fibrosis with the processing is still similar. If you look at the series of 11 patients, the difference is within 2.7%, which is not much. So that's just repeatable. We can repeat the MRI and the LGE and get the same images. And this is for the cardiac MRI specialists, and this is for the EPs and the surgeons and the researchers as well. And one of the reasons, I really like this slide a lot. This is a collection of our patients for the The reason why I like this slide is 2 ways. Number one is why MRI works. Because there's a scar, there's a patch, and that's why LGE-MRI works. Because this is an area where I have a scar where the gadolinium is slow, washing out, stays behind. And we're finding this and confirming this in surgery, but what we're finding here is that the human AFib, the scar is based structural remodeling connected to human AFib, is different from the animal models that we built over these years where AFib begets AFib, and we're still working on to learn a lot from these models, but this is different. I mean, when Ralph, for example, today he was talking about MR-based scar, that's I expect it to be a very diffuse scar, different than we don't have much of this guy to go through for example. But anyway, these kind of scar that we see in AFib population that comes to see us is that patches of changes. Well, if you look at animal models in Utah, people have been, dogs and goats have been in AFib more than a year. It's starting to be diffused. It's very hard to apply this, actually using T1 mapping in these guys more than anything else. But keep in mind patches of scarring in an AFib population. Don't forget that. And then we showed that a while ago. And the reason why we showed the anatomical mapping in 2009, this is the first paper we published correlating this to outcome. We had to put the cartoon maps because the reviewers would come back to us, give us the cartoon maps, give us the voltage map, give us the voltage map. And it's irritating to me. And this is the right crew I'm talking to here, because you are the masters of mapping, intercardiac, extracardiac. It's irritating to me that we have to take a spatial resolution. If you move your catheter, depending on what I do, or Phil does, or Dr. F.H.R.S does in the lab, this is like a 4 millimeter tip. I'm moving it around to understand what's the voltage look like. But this is a real tissue. This should be the standard, and we should correct this to this. But you know, but the first paper to get it out. That's why when I talked today, I really saw these images because I know this is very subjective. And you see this lecture. You and me were at AFib think tank last week. Remember the voltage mapping that was presented based on the catheter and making this ascendant. But that's a real tissue we're dealing with. It's enhancing. And that should be our standard. At least we correlated this first paper, the first 70 patients, and showed correlation. So, I hope this will work. So we also look at the scar when we ablate a FIB. So this is red. It's a different thresholding we use, but this is a scar from the MRI, ablation scar. Red is deep, transmural, white is more. And we're doing more and more. I want to show you some data, which is very exciting about, is the progression of the disease. So we ablate AFib. I heard today that Phil's outcome today, we're not finding our recurrences for Urim and his group to map them anymore, to look at the recurrences, which is impressive. Five patients only out of 30. But we often think that ablation lesions are the problem for recurrence. Yes, it is the problem. But there's another problem we have to start talking about, and that's what we're learning from MRI, is the progression of fibrosis. That's really important. I want to show you some data of this. But again, this here is showing that we can image ablation scar as well. I'll come to later and talk about this. So what's the clinical value of this? How are we using this in our practice today after work of the last 9 years in Utah? This is the DCAP study. I showed you some images from this. A multicenter study where we blinded operators to the image. So we told them, run the sequence, give us the image, and do your ablation the way you want to do. Usually, for example, the Bordeaux group, some of the patients is still in DCAP 2, they use the ECGI system. Some people use the balloons to ablate the patient. We never told them what to do, just ablate your patient persistent Parkinson's. And we blinded them to this. So what we did here, we put the patient in 4 stages. Utah stage 1, which is less than 10% fibrotic changes. 10 to 20 green. More than 30, sorry, is Utah stage 4. As you see, like the whole atrium is almost dead. And this is stage 3. And people ask me once, why have 4 stages? I said, it sounds very nice, 4, 3. That's all the reason for why. No, statistically it was equalized, but now we're seeing that these stages are getting closer and closer. But this is the outcome of DCAP 1, which is proved after a follow-up of almost a little bit more than a year, that the more fibrosis you have, this is all that we learned from here, is the more fibrosis you have, the worse is the outcome, independent how Nassir is good, independent how Dave Rotor is great, independent how Hendricks and Watson is fantastic, or Mashrinsky, these are the centers working with us, it's not center dependent, we corrected all these factors, it's fibrosis breaks outcome. But also we learned that this is our data from Utah after 6 years of follow-up. You can tell it's a series of, I think we had around 380 patients in study. But you look here, like stage 4, high recurrence rate of 6 years, stage 1, stage 2 come together, but still within 70% success with catheter ablation. So again, single center experience after 6 years we're trying to publish this. So we learned also it's not only the quality, this is very important, not only the quality of the fibrosis, the quantity, but also the quality of the fibrosis plays an important role. This is something we presented last week at the American Heart. So we took the DCAP population to be unbiased as we could, and then we looked at the distribution of fibrosis based on the size of the pads and where they're located, and what that means for the persistency or behavior of AFib. So we looked at the patches sizes, and then you see here anything, and this is the patch size is 5.2 centimeter square, and then there's 4 of them. There's another one, 5 in this area. What we looked at is, and this is another example, patch example. This is we call this one single patch because they're connected. We have sub-analysis now looking at what this connection means in terms of, how arithmogenic this site is and what this means in recurrence and so on. But when we looked at this kind of patches, and what we found is the persistent AFib patients, have at least 3 or more patches versus paroxysmal AFib. And the mean patches are 2 patches per patient if you looked at in this study, the DCAF2 study. And we also found that the large pad volume is persistent AFib than the size of the patches is way bigger with the AFib, persistent AFib patient versus paroxysmal AFib patient. And this is important as well. Left atrial appendage and anterior wall involvement. We saw this in almost an 87% of persistent AFib patient. And I want to be careful. There's no, I don't have p-value here because now the persistent AFib patient was small in DCAF2. So I'm careful putting this as if there's no p-value that's significant. That's why you don't see p-value here. But 87% persistent AFib patient, there was 23% of the DCAF1 patient were persistent, the rest were paroxysmal. And the majority of the paroxysmal. This could be either paroxysmal or because the patient put in DCAF1 was ablation population mean age of 59. We don't know yet, but take this with be careful how to interpret the data so far. But at least there's a trend, more persistency, the more left atrial appendage involved anterior wall. And Pam Gal from Holland showed this. This is the data presented that the bigger the size of the patch, the more compact the patch is, the higher recurrence rate. And have this we have multiple reasons. Either we're not targeting very well, either we're missing some rotor sites. I think I've sent the surgeon because I do a better job of dating those because of the channels. And I saw you in the histology picture, there's a lot of disease tissue between the pathways. And we can cover them with the mapping catheter, but you never see those. So I think this is one issue. But again, the bigger the patch size, the higher chance of recurrence in this patient population. And then if you're correct, atrial fibrosis, but the largest patch together, this is after multivariate analysis, the most powerful predictor for recurrence in this patient population in DCAF1. And this is an example. These are 4 patients with 10 to 20% fibrosis change in MR. And you can tell the mean fibrosis in this patient is the same, almost the same. But the recurrence rate differs by almost 30% based on the size of the patch. This is one patch because connected. It's within, and this is another example here. The lower edge of Utah 2, 11%, and the higher edge, 19%. The same thing. What counts here is the size of the patch, although the more fibrosis. So it's not only quantity, but also the quality of the fibrosis and distribution seems to play an important role. And this is the Utah 3 patients as an example. Mean of recurrence rate in DCAF1 was 35%, as I said, almost a little bit longer than a year. But you have 20% extra differences based on the size of the patch. And this has been used now more often in our practice as well to decide what to do with the patient next. So this is called the papers, and this is important for you as well in decision making and what we learn. Going out towards myopathy, away from the AFib concept, and AFib is on top of it, is that the higher the amount of fibrosis, paper from Marcus Decoret, who was with us and as a fellow, and actually he won the award at the F.H.R.S. award for this clinical study of the year back then, for this presentation, where he showed the higher the fibrosis among left atrium, you have an almost 4-fold increased risk of stroke. Practically the Utah 3s and 4s, so more than 20%, 21%. Your chance of stroking is higher. Akum showed this in this paper where it correlated these amount of fibrotic changes to left and atrial appendage clots and spontaneous atrial contrast. We know that both of those are great for stroke as well. That's a paper published in JCE as well. And last but not least, this is a paper from Germany Mancock, who uses this same sequence, and fibrosis, he presented this in ACC this year, where he showed that patients who present with strokes with unknown origin, like cryptogenic strokes, and he compared them with the non-origin strokes, and he saw the same amount of fibrosis in their atrium. The same for AFib and normal sinus rhythm. There's a myopathy with these patients. So if you ask an AP, we put a link in there, and if you ask Medtronic, it's always AFib, it's a wait longer. If you ask Pfizer and Boehringer Ingelheim, give blood thinners to everybody. So we come in between, said you need to define the people high risk of fibrosis. Look at the myopathy, define these patients, start treating them as a solution. But again, you see the level of enhancement in atrium seems the same in these patients, trying to define them as going forward. Jordan King, working with us, looked at a series of our patients from our database, around 800 patients, a little bit more with atrial fibrosis, less than 15%, more than 15%. Now the outcome data is starting to come out because of enough follow-up. And you can tell that when you cross to 20% or more fibrosis, your chance of major adverse cardiovascular events increase exponentially, and you can tell. So again, Utah 3 and Utah 4, when you cross the 20% line, that 20% number, 22% seems to be, although you compare less than 15 or more, but that's where we start getting strokes. We're getting alarmed by these numbers in Utah today. That's an important factor. That's novel. Josh Cates published this already with Adam Morris. So we took the atrial tissue shape. So this is the atrial tissue. We put a massive atlas, and I talked to the guys today in the morning. That was a brilliant shape for the ECGI. Get all this massive atlas of all these activation maps. I saw great data in the presentation about the body pacing and activation maps. That's something for you guys to tap into. It's amazing. But again, that's what we did here with this atlas. We did 980 patient atlas with shapes and looked at the shape. What's the shape implication? So everybody in this room, your heart and your atrium have a different shape, and that's seems to be from this data atherogenic and thrombogenic as well. Like I'm going to show you. So we showed the different shapes. We came up with 4 groups of shapes. And the reason why 4 groups, because I could not get. They gave me a scale from 1 to 20, the different shapes group, and we get it in 4 quartiles. So the people with this kind of shapes, shape number 4 here, have a higher persistency of AFib versus paroxysmal versus patient in normal non-AFib controls, have this kind of shapes. So these guys, not only the 4 shapes, as we came to these classes. Again, this is something that's simplified for physician use. So the class 1 shape, class 2, class 3, and 4, and we use this in our protocol now. So we have fibrosis, we have the quality of fibrosis, we have the quantity of fibrosis, and we have the shape of the atrium. We put them all together, and we try to come with what's the best for our patient in terms of treatment. This has been shown to be associated with recurrence. As important as this slide here, shape is not volume. Please keep this in mind. When you leave this room, promise me one thing: don't correlate shape with. I'm not looking at the volumes first. I'm looking at the shape of the atrial wall. Where is pulmonary vein hanging in this atrium with the appendages and so on, as I showed you. And Eric presented this in F.H.R.S. this year, and he showed that if you add the shape to the fibrosis score, you have a very powerful, very ROC curve, very powerful. 0.83, that's his intense statistical word. That's his big statistical number, so keep this in mind. And now, we're using this for the shape of the appendage on top of this. If you add this, we have only small data. Let's look at thrombosis, spontaneous air contrast. We need to look at thousands of patients to predict stroke, but this is really very powerful predictor. If you add the shape component to your stroke, it has spontaneous air thrombus formation. We're excited about DCAF2 because we're looking at this as well. So that's the same slide as before. So again, shape becoming component. We have all the shapes. Now I can tell you left atrial shape, right atrial shape, and V shape. We're working on this as well. Progression of fibrosis. I showed you some images already, and I showed you this movie already. You've seen how we do it. But this is a work from Mohammed Labidi, who's working with us, a cardiology fellow joining EP. But they looked at the people who have multiple MRIs and not have an ablation or treatment. And you see that initial MRI, follow-up, and MRI, and look at the changes in fibrosis at follow-ups. And you saw somebody have no massive change, and somebody have massive and significant change. And what's interesting is that the majority of the patients, at least at 1 year follow-up in AFib, independent from AFib persistency or proximal AFib, they don't have massive change in fibrotic in their atrium. Maybe the electrical modeling is happening, but this doesn't change as much. These are patients, again, have no ablation, right? Just medical treatment. More than 2% increase, 32%, more 5% increase, and more 10%, 10% increase is 9%. So it's almost 30% of significant increase in their fibrosis scale. And that's important because they go from, this is what defines them from one stage to another. But the majority of patients doesn't seem to have a major change in their fibrosis at follow-up. And why this is important, as I showed you before, the progression of fibrosis in ablation patients, defining redo procedures, defining people reason for recurrence. And I would really like to see what the mapping looks like with the ECGI specifically. So this is a patient after ablation. There's not much changes here. See that green is little. There's another patient of significant change. This is ablation at 6 months, and then you see the new fibrotic changes here. Okay, that's significant. This is another patient who have recovery of the reds, but they have green coming on top. So different thresholding when we look at that in image processing with the MRIs we use. So why this is important? This is a pattern of recurrence. We call it the new or progression. These are recurrence patients. Recovery we see in everybody. Red are lesions. They recover in almost every human being. Have some kind of recovery, except the cryo recovery is under the significant RF recovery, but you have recovery. But we see either new after recovery, new fibrosis, or progression. So recovery is not significant. We see new fibrotic area, massive, called progression. So two patterns we look at. And this is really interesting for us and important for what we do, because now, not only treating patients, ablation doesn't work for everybody, not only because the ablation lesion might hurt, but there's other factors you have to look at. The progression of disease. Should I send them to the surgeon here? Should I do something else with them? I don't know. I'm looking for an answer. Maybe you can help me in terms of defining mapping this patient and so on. Don't forget the ventricular the ventricle. We're learning a lot. The beauty about MR, you scan the whole heart. And with our sequence, which I really look forward to share this with Pam and her team so you can apply it here, we get the whole heart in everybody. So it's 45-minute scan. And it's 1.25 millimeter thickness in the ventricle. It's a beautiful sequence. I showed some data. We showed that there's more fibrosis in every dysfunction patient. We showed this already. It's a paper from Mehmet Akaya, who's back in Turkey now. But we're looking at three different concepts. We're looking at strain imaging, we're looking at T1 mapping, and we're looking at LGE, looking at the ventricle. I mean, these things, you heard about them a lot. It's been established concepts. LGE has been debated, and we're implementing this a new concept and integrating this to T1 and strain imaging into one concept with the thresholds we're using in these patients to make it more solid. And this is based on all the work I'm showing. Some of it here is based on the UMAC project, which is the AFib fund we built in Utah. We got the state money to build this. And obviously we're imaging these rapid atrial model, pacing model of dogs, and some goals in the state, but we're looking at strain imaging. But the bottom line, tagging, somebody showed me tagging imaging today, and we're doing this as well. But what we're seeing is that the strain start going down before even EF get impacted. So there's intercellular space. It's getting bigger and bigger in this patient before. That's what we're looking at with the strain imaging, obviously, and predictability. The same thing with, this is another example from the goat from Eugene and Ranjan's work. And you can tell that before the EF is gone down, you have the LV strain is impacted. And by the way, I wrote this equation myself. Just kidding. I have no idea what this is. This is a permeability coefficient we look for, how the cellular changes in terms of using. So we look at this lambda, and we looked at the T1 in this patient population. You see next slide that the lower the number on the T1 mapping number, this number, the lower, the worse, the bigger the intercellular space is in MR. And the same thing here, the higher the lambda, the worse is the intercellular space. And then we looked at and correlated this with histology, and we have a very good correlation, as you can see this from the animal work. And why I'm showing you all this, because now we implemented this in humans, and this has been shown. This is the last slide. T1 mapping. If you map this, and you can see this is the fibrosis and fibrosis. You can see areas you can tell how bad it is, how good it is. And we did this in human study. This has been published by Dr. Saksarajit from Thailand, who's working with us as a fellow now. So we looked at pre-ablation. This is an example. Pre-ablation and post-ablation. I should put the right one. You can tell 612, the number increased. And this is the first time I'm aware of that ablation is, or treating the AFib shows an improvement in intracellular space, and not in EF. Not in EF. So the EF is normal in this patient before and after. But he presented this in American Heart Club 2 weeks ago, or last week already, where he showed that you're improving T1 imaging in these patients after ablation. That's very encouraging, right? So now we can track this. And obviously we're looking who respond, who are the people who flatline on this, who people get worse. We need to know. This is only 11 patient study, very small study. Now we're trying to look at more and more patients as we go forward, because it's a novel sequence we've been using in integrating T1 to the LGE. He also showed us that if you scan AFib patients, we scan, as I said, the ventricle as well, we're finding 9% of our population have some kind of lesion in the ventricle. And we have to take this seriously. Why? This is a CoreView software taking the ventricle. If you look at this ventricle, showing you MRI, cardiac MR radiologist or cardiac MRI specialist, he would tell you there's nothing wrong with this. But if you run the sequence of LGE with a T1 that we defined there, you see some green there. And this is becoming more important because you can start seeing some patient like this, and some patient like this, or some patient like this, isolated myopathy, and some patient who have nothing in the ventricle, and some patient like this, atrial ventricular myopathy. So the AFib is really driving more of this. This is generalized. And again, we see this in around the incidental finding, the white spot, we see 9%, but this, we see in almost 18% of the population. We see more LG is slowing of the gadolinium more sharp. And he looked at this in terms of outcome, and he showed patients who have, this is ablation, simple ablation outcome. We always take care of the atrium, but take the ventricle to this, higher chance of recurrence if you have this. And he also showed that, look at MACE, cardiac events, mortality, MI. MI is not significant. Mortality and the ischemic stroke. MACE was significant, putting this combined endpoint together. In univariant analysis and multivariant analysis was this significant. So this means a lot, you know. Now we're looking, we're seeing things we've never seen before. That's the beauty about this. And now we can map it with the your ECGI concept as well to understand further. So this is the kind of patient we see. Utah 1, a lot of fibrosis here. What do you call this? Utah 1C, T1D, but that's something we need to think about in terms of defining. Utah 3 and little fibrosis here, and the same thing, massive and dirty atrial and ventricle. Keep this in mind. EP, you help define this in the world, you know, that you're Rudy and others in the world. But what we do when Phil goes to the lab tomorrow, he looks at anatomical structure to abate his arrhythmia. We learned this in AVNRT, there's triangular cough, we know what the slow pathway is. We combine electricity and anatomy all the time in EP, right? We do this in flutters. This is isthmus-dependent flutter. There's an IVC and this tricuspid annulus. We do this VTs. We look at the scars. You can see them easy to see in MR. We do this in pathways. There's a bundle, anatomical structure, and we look at the action potential, the potential, the procreative fibers or his potential, or the PW potential, whatever you want to call it, and we ablate them to cure the exit pathways or AVRT. So we do this in EP all the time. Same thing when we look at that's why PVI is so successful, because we all agree as the trigger comes out, we still try to define what the yellow lines mean. But all of us today, if you ask any EP in the world, the only thing we agree on is a PVI, pulmonary vein isolation. Why? Because you gave us a target, an anatomical target. We are good at that as the EPs, and there's a trigger behind it, everybody's happy. But the target persistent AFib, but what I'm trying to talk about is there, but we don't want to see it. And now we have to present it. We're presenting it to you using mapping, using imaging, whatever. There's a substrate. We can't neglect the agent. And that's what I'm trying to show here. This is data from ablation lesions See those? From DCAF 1. So we took unbiased. By the way, in DCAF 1, there's only 4 patients from Utah. The rest is around the world. Keep this in mind. So these are lesions could be from Michel Hasseger's lab, could be from the cryoablation guys in Frankfurt, could be from Wilber lab or Marshinsky's lab, I don't know from where. All they try to do, every single patient in PDI. Okay? But you see the red is lesion formation. You see how little lesions are formed there when you look at this MRI 3 months after procedure. They all try to look at it. And we looked at the lack of lesion formation around the pulmonary vein as indicator for recurrence. And what we found is only 6.7% of patients have lesions on the veins, but not as important is that the amount of veins in circuit did not predict outcome in AFib. There's more than just ablating pulmonary vein. That's what I'm trying to say. And I have to be careful to say that in an EP community. I have 2 EPs sitting and looking at me here, because that's important, because you're changing everything with line look. The PVI is great and enough, which could be. I'm not saying it's not. But what we learned from DCAF 1 is that, again, this is very objective, because as people are blinded to these images, the more ablation lesions they cover the disease tissue, the better the outcome. So the less of the screen left behind uncovered or covered with ablation, the better the outcome. Make sense? So the more disease you burn, more green you burn, the better the patient will do. And this, again, this is not, we didn't look at that as accidental findings, to look at what predictors for outcome. And this is what we intention to do. So we went back to the lab, started doing this now, in terms of isolating the fibrosis and ablating it to cover it with lesion. And then we can do this with this is an inflated this lesion, but this is a cryoballoon ablation. You can do posterior wall cryos for one who uses cryos, and can the balloons, you can put against posterior targeting fibrotic changes. Even the cryo seems to be working. And this is important because I really like the lesion formation in cryos and long-term durability of the lesions. But that residual fibrosis, the fibrosis left behind, seems to predict outcome from this paper I published recently in JCE. It was on the cover actually, what Akum was very proud of. But the more fibrosis you leave behind, the higher chance of recurrence. And he publishes another paper as well, showing the same concept outside the DCAF from our own population. So we try to cover fibrosis in Utah on a regular basis. And that's some data. I have to be careful to represent it here and talk about rotors. It's not to call it rotational activities or whatever you want to call it, but that's the Topera system. That's the data from Dave Wilber's lab. You see this white line, it's one of his posters in F.H.R.S. He gave it to me, and I copied this from him. And he's showing that this activity, or rotator activity, they are almost around this fibrotic area. They're not in the field of the anchor where his fibrosis is. And this is one of our, we started using this, I said to some people here in the room, they asked me, we did 2 cases this last week. And you can tell, as we're finding, this is what the system telling us the Topera rotors are. What we're doing is when we ablate fibrosis, forget the rotors for a second, we didn't see any change in these 2 ablations, but it's too early to say anything about it. What we're seeing is when we start ablating, targeting the fibrotic tissue and persistent AFib, we start seeing organization of AFib and even some termination in some patient. Or organization, like in this example, you can see beginning and the end, some organization of activity start taking this. And this seen in 72% of the patients do a lot of ablation of the scar, some organization. Termination, only 10%. If you take fibrosis out of the equation, if you terminate AFib, only 10% of the cases. Organization, increase the cycle length, we see this more, but this kind of either fibrosis ablation is working, or you can say you're killing half of the age of Marrouche. You should change, would make sense. I can answer this question until the prospective studies come to life. That's the system that's been developed here, the ECGI. This is Pierre Jailly's paper. Actually, he's trying to publish this. We're defining these types of anchoring of types of fibrosis where the rotors, what he describes as rotor in this paper, which as I asked him to use this because hopefully this paper will come out soon. But he said that the ECGI mapping will anchor on specific type of fibrosis, like more spread, not compact fibrosis, but always on the border of fibrosis. My question is, if we ablate this here is enough, or should we go around the whole fibrosis? I don't know. But this is, again, this is your system that's been developed here. at Rudy's lab, and then it seems to be working around fibrosis as well. So anatomy and electricity are coming together, which makes sense, right? And now we're doing decaf too. By the way, Ralph is in the DSMB of this study. I should not be talking to him. I should be in the same room with him because he and Jim Thomas from Northwestern who's from Virginia? DeMarco, John DeMarco from West Virginia, DSMB of DCAF2. So we're going with this concept, multicenter, 1,000 patient study, almost 180, 42 sites, randomized, endpoint-driven study. We're going to learn a lot of this study, tons, right? So this is, we're going to randomize patients either to PVI only. There's a recent study called the STAR-AF, showing that PVI is enough for persistent AFib, versus fibrosis guided ablation, where we do PVI and look at the fibrosis. So that will give us an answer. Is this important or not? How it's helping us? And we have, this study is beautiful because we are having MRI at 3 months as well, and 1,000 patients. You can tell what's the impact of this in science in terms of understanding more physiology. And this is PVI, and this is targeting fibrosis concept. We have to isolate fibrosis at least. So we use this in our classification today to look at our patient indication, Utah 1 and 2. We try to ablate them. 3 and 4, and again, if this is widespread, we look at the ventricular myopathy, we look at diffuse fibrosis, large, small patches, and we look at the shape as well, especially in these patients. Here we're trying to, if you have a shape 4, for example, and widespread fibrosis or plus or minus, if they ablate them, and I have to admit my threshold of ablating is lower. We're doing more studies now, but we always get this into choosing patients to get ablated or not. And in terms of I'm not sure. This is still a debate. Who you continue blood thinners on, who you stop it. There's a lot of pros and cons in this, and we use this scheme here. We use the shape. We use the fibrosis in the ventricle before we stop anticoagulation. Because a lot of patients come to be unable to stop their blood thinners, and we recommend this to them before we even start. You have the high risk factors. This is especially in the Utah in the Chad Vasc 1 or 0 patients. You have to deal with them. If you see this kind of presentation, we don't stop blood thinners. And for redo procedures, we started to use this as well. These are actually, I call them the Damianus patient because these are only AFib lesions in the wallets. People know about, call them the Damianus patient. We should send them to the surgeon to understand we can do better for this patient if they recur with this kind of recurrence. Ablation, these in MR, last 5 minutes and 10 minutes to talk about it. A lot of edema. This is a patient, all paper actually. We showed that the MRI does not correlate with the voltage mapping. Post-ablation, right? This is all the lesions here, but the not correlation. And the reason why is the edema. This is another paper as well from Dr. Pamar from our lab, where we showed the ablation. This is before the sensor, the force catheters that we see. But this is the catheters with the force. It's from Biosense Webster. These are lesions I did without. Every 5 seconds, we tell our operator to take a point. It doesn't matter where I am in Atrial, just take a point. Every 5 seconds. I've always seen all the maps in Utah. This is me because we ablate and move. We learned that 5 seconds lesions with 50 watts, we use 50 watts, very high wattage. With 5 or 7 grams is enough to make a lesion in Atrial. 16% enhancement of esophagus. On MRI, you wait 24 hours to resolve, but 2% remains, and if you do endoscopy, you may see some changes and recover. But what I'm showing in this is a 3 gram lesion formation, and this is a 7 gram. So the summary of this slide is that sensor is beautiful of touching for fellows teaching, but don't rely on it. Every region have different lesion formation, thickness of the atrium, the fibrosis, the blood flow, all those factor into how good the lesion is forming when you do an ablation. So that's what we learned from the other year. That's an abstract putting together as your paper we're finishing. We started doing cryos more and more, and this is, we put the DCAF2, DCAF1, which was 28 patient DCAF1 from Europe, using cryo from our data. And we looked how many percent, more than 50% of the times, where all the centers, lesions are consistent at 3 months. You see, the more red, the more consistency. The blue is the less consistency. I've seen the scale a lot. And this is RF ablation. And you can tell how consistent and predictable the cryo lesions are, which is an impressive study, 3 months. And this is 70% of the time or more, and you see that's less, but still, compared to RF, This is very operator dependent. This is not, I don't want to say this in front of VPs, by the way, otherwise we lose some job there. We're using this in flutter mapping. So flutter post PVI, we learned a lot. This is an image post ablation. You see that dirty every ablation lesion everywhere, fibrosis, whatever. But it's interesting if you map those on the 3D mapping system, Carto, you see those, you know, you can predict them before ablation here and here. You have to fill the gaps. But this case, for example, if you do the posterior, in this case as well, there's always a posterior wall. We learned this a while ago. This is the roof. There's a problem in terms of these flutters. And MRI taught us don't leave anything unconnected. If you go in, if you see candidates, you have to connect them. And you start connecting them, and you start terminating flutters. And this is important. This is another example. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but the bottom line here, that these patients, Utah 1s and 2s, a little fibrosis, if you don't do a flutter line, a roof line at least, it could be a problem if you just do PVI in terms of when they occur. And especially, you've seen this, that most of the patients in these early stages have flutters at recurrence, while these guys have fibrosis recurrence when they come back. And the majority of these flutters are roof flutters. This is supposed to be a real-time MRI imaging, but it's not working. We learned a lot of how to make this better in terms of understanding the real-time in the lab, what we're doing. And until now, to be honest, we didn't have a solution until this T1 concept came to life. A lot of edema. Look at the edema we're causing with ablation in here, showing this example. See how much is one lesion, see how much swelling you have. And if you look at the solution for this, this is Eugene Skarmovsky's work from experimental model. This is a T1 weighted, not T1 mapping, T1 weighted MR. So this is no contrast. That's pretty cool, actually. So now we can look at the core of the lesion immediately after neglecting the edema. This doesn't work at chronic, it's called acute only. And there's a core where there's no reflow in that area, which is predict long-term lesion formation. And we could show this in atrium and in the ventricle. But now, when I leave the lab, this is an example showing the delayed enhancement of T2 weighted with the edema all around it versus this core T1 imaging, T1 weighted imaging. And now we can know this is what predicts long-term, and this is the histology. So these lesions here, you see, this is the acute ones, and these are chronic ones. The chronic ones, you can not see them within 24 hours with this kind of imaging. These are chronic ones, but the acute ones, you can see the core, which tends to stay after at 3 months follow-up. You can still, this is the LGE, and this is the T1, and see how they correlate. And we are excited about this because now we have in the lab, without using gadolinium, we can tell which lesion is going to stay in 3 months in atrium and the ventricle. I really believe there's a lot of things we did in this area. Cryo, we learned a lot of the cryo source versus RF. You know, use the cryo in the surgery room as well. We don't see edema. This is a lesion in the ventricle, cryo versus RF. And 1 week after, you see some swelling at 1 week later, but not acutely. And versus RF recovery. See the edema here is a big area of that much recovery you've seen at 1 week later. And this is what we're trying to do now. We developed this balloon, MRI compatible balloon with Medtronic. With Eugene Skarmovsky, designed the coils and work on engineering this. But this is really beautiful if you do a PVI. I like cryo, you can see it easier with MR. We're excited about this. I'm not sure how much actually we're working with Biosense now. Biosense website is working in balloon. Boston Scientific is working, everybody working in balloon suddenly. But this is our experiments on real-time MRI balloon. And this is left atrial to see how big the balloon you can do posterior wall debulking because of PVI. And then I think this is going to help us a lot in terms of EP lab. One shot and B and predicting outcome is easier. But you have the dilemma of how much fibrosis we can debug with this. That's something we're testing as well. All in all, thank you for allowing me to be here today. I'm very excited and honored, by the way. I can't take this for granted to be invited by your ability to spend a day here. That's a big honor to me. And you know you made it in your career when he calls you to come over and spend time with him. And I don't take it for granted because I had this cardiac surgery he was watching. My presentation, that's a big deal too. Thank you for a great day here.
Questions and comments to Dr. Marrouche?
What's known about what's driving the fibrotic disease process? Is it an autoimmune type response, or is anything being done to see if there are ways to stop the progression?
There's a lot of reasons we know that fibrosis can be caused. Right? This hypertension is a risk factor, chronic disease is a risk factor, hypothyroidism is a risk factor, valvular disease, we talk about this, heart failure. What we're doing here was we're already starting to see that. Right? AFib patients have fibrosis. They come with this risk. We don't know what happened before. This is a study we talked about today. We're trying now in Utah, a prospective study, people between the age of 40 and 60, no comorbidities, maybe one risk factor that's not diabetes or F.H.R.S. We're trying to scan them and follow them for time, documenting. We're doing genomic testing as well on them, and actually we're working for partners, so we're trying to very strongly doing pilot first. But that's the only way. I mean, you know, what Euron is trying to do is that he said, you know, genomics is great, disease is here, there's a phenotype you have to focus on, this could be it, but I don't know why fibrosis happened in your patient. What differentiates from Utah 2 and 2 people? Same age, this kind of dense fibrosis, the other guy comes out with nothing. And you know, marathon runners, we see a lot of sports people, bikers in Utah, they have a high incidence of fibrosis when they age 50, 55. 18% population without AFib older than 65 have fibrosis. More than 50%. So, are they going to have AFib if you wait longer? Where does the fibrosis come from? Is it aging only? Is it other factor? So obviously this needs more defining type of fibrosis, cellular changes, collagen changes. Imaging have to improve and go on that level. Imaging 1.25. Now we know it's there, but obviously we don't. I mean, PET MR, we have one here. So, I wish Pam was here. That's she is here. Sneak on me. PET MR, I mean, that's a great answer to the physiology. If you scan this field multiply, understanding, we have a lot of molecules we know what differentiate fibrosis, we can image those.
Quick question. Low voltage area by voltage has been proposed to predict the age of fibrosis. How well your patient correlate with low voltage area?
That was my first slides I showed. I don't care about voltage mapping. I'm sorry. Sorry.
I'm with you.
I care about activation mapping. I care about, you know, if you ask three of us here, we do anybody else do fibrillation? You do fibrillation. You don't map as much as we do, but you go into the heart and try to define scar area. We disagree in how we define it. You know, what's the voltage we're using in the atrium? Is it 0.1 millivolt? Is it 0.5 millivolts? So what's the scar? That's the question. And if I go to the first slide I showed you, I want to cut this here to go faster there. One of my first slides I showed you here, this one. I lost the slide. So you're really looking for, so if you put your catheter tip, 4 millimeter tip, in here versus in here, what kind of voltage you get? So this is what I'm struggling with and taking voltage as a standard. But we know this works very well with ventricle in some patients. And in ventricle, we don't stop on one part of the scar, even if there may be T, we're completely ablating around it until we get with the scar. But you know, this will give you probably 0.1 and 0.5, and this will, if you put it right here in this scar, will give you 0.1 and 0.5. But put it right here, maybe this tissue will be firing. That will give you 0.5, 0.6. So this is where. The more I look at tissue, the more I get very skeptical about you know, taking the voltage mapping as a standard for tissue visualization. And remember, you're looking at one side of the heart. You're not looking at 3D like the MR. Now, activation is a different story, right? Activation makes sense. It's going this way, coming this way. That's a different story.
I'm just curious, when you mentioned PET MR, so for the PET component, what would you target? Would you just use FDG for general inflammation? Would you, you know, target macrophages? You know.
I mean, I would sit down. The first thing I would do before I do anything, I'll sit down with we looked at a lot of models today for the fibrosis, the whole fibrosis cascade in nature. There's a lot of components, and we talked about what to target for treatment. You know, what stops this from progressing. I mean, that's something we need to work on. And just show me what the changes happen. Target the fibroblasts, for example, myofibroblasts, or collagen type 1-3, how they change in the atrial, in the valvular AFib versus hypertension AFib versus aging AFib. I only understand that changes in the three types of people, and will help me a lot in terms of pathophysiology. I start tagging, I mean, there's a lot of cells we can target in that cascade, in that area. But I would start as simple as collagen. We have 3 times been described in mitral valve disease versus lone AFib patients. You see different kind of fibrosis patterns happening and changing. In histology, which we never seen this in MR, we can differentiate them. So that's the way I started with functional changes. You can do this with PET, we can't do that. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I guess we'd have to find out, what we could target, how we would get something to bind specifically.
You have the expert there. You can do histology. So,
Nassir, great talk. I have 2 questions for you. One, have you looked at right atrial fibrosis and whether the percentage of the amount of right atrial fibrosis affects the success of catheter ablation, particularly since most people who do catheter ablation just target the left atrium? Both in our mapping studies and others have shown anywhere from, when you just look at dominant frequency or even rotor-driven activity, the right atrium is important in a certain percentage of patients when you map them in the OR. Have you looked at that? I never see you separate right and left atrial. Have you ever seen patients with predominant right atrial fibrosis, and would that change your ablation strategy?
No, I never actually. We published a paper, actually because of ECGI work and thorough work, and we started to do this routinely again, you see right and left atrium. We published a paper in JC 4 years ago, where we looked at patients with, I couldn't publish this paper, where he looked at patient with tachycardia syndrome and had an atrial ablation, looked at indication for pacemaker, and he put the right and left atrium. And he showed if you have an anterior wall, sinus node area based fibrosis, the higher the chance we see UTA 3 and 4. If you see patients there with UTA 3 and 4 and have tachycardia syndrome, prepare yourself to put in pacemakers because of involvement. But what he showed in that paper is that right atrium always follows the left. It's really a septum and anterior wall where he saw the fibrotic. The right atrial free wall and the appendage area seems to protect it, but we see a lot of fibrosis in the septum and in the anterior wall around the sinus node area. I'm not sure what your experience is with fibrotic tissue. Do you see a lot of fibrosis in right atrial visual in your patient when you open the heart?
Well,
look at those.
The answer is in valve, the majority of ablation we do as a surgeon right now is in valve patients, and you see some dramatic right atrial fibrosis, particularly in patients who have pulmonary hypertension and tricuspid regurg, but in the rheumatic population, it's usually a biatrial disease. The other patients that seem to have equivalent changes in both atrium are the people with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy or really bad diastolic dysfunction is one of the etiologies of their atrial enlargement, and that seems to be a biatrial disease. And that's what I'm wondering if you, if you quantified, while it may follow, are patients with extensive right atrial fibrosis more likely to follow? When you talk about atrial fibrosis in the Utah score, is that just left atrial fibrosis?
That's the left, and right falls the left. It's not that much fibrosis.
You don't really see much in the
So if you go to the Utah 4s, you see right atrial fibrosis as well, and massive amount there as well. But keep in mind, we're getting more experience as we go forward. There's 1,850 patients now with atrial fibrosis in Utah, but all of them sent for ablation. It's a selected population. The patient you're talking about, I never see him. He goes to the ER, goes somewhere else. But that's why we're trying to get people like you involved in other, and this prospective study before even the fibrosis happened. We're getting the non-ablation patient. We need to go out that box and start thinking about the general population of fibrosis, how it changes it. We have a sleep apnea study, how this is impacted. We have subgroup showing more fibrosis in this patient. What's the right age? Is it more? How we define that? So that's what we're working on as we speak. Pulmonary hypertension, the right ventricle is very well scarred. We learn a lot of, makes a lot of sense. We're learning a lot from this. Right atrium is protected at its stages. It seems to be involved later. So that's a pulmonary hypertension thing. With an independent study with this outside the AFib. But this is AFib selected population comes to us with for ablation, but now with getting, and you will hopefully, working with diameters, you get us more data down the road.
I was just curious, and you may have presented this, but do you have, with the 1,800 patients, the threshold level correlated with outcomes? In other words, if you have, a certain volume of fibrosis at a certain threshold level, how do patients perform after ablation? In other words, can you predict in advance, who, will have recurrence and who won't? Is there a...
This is, maybe I missed that at the beginning, but that's why I showed it.
Yeah,
You saw the cap where you heard?
No,
So this is a multicenter. This is yes, and this is a multicenter study. The more fibrosis you have, the higher chance of recurring for F.H.R.S. And this is the JAMA paper, and this is our data. Stage 4 have a higher recurrence rate, longer responder ablation data. Yes, it does predict outcome with this, but it's more important that we look at surrogate endpoints. We showed some data, strokes and body events and mortality and becoming more sad.
So I have a question. I'm not so clear about the target of the fibrosis-based ablation. Because from ventricular studies and animal model studies, we know that really what is at the core of arrhythmogenesis in scars is heterogeneity of the scar. And so one strategy has been to homogenize the scar. What you showed in the beginning was that the greater the islands of fibrosis, the more atrial fibrillation, or the worse the outcome. And in fact, if you ablate the border and the way you showed, you increase the island. Unless the assumption is that there is focal activity within the scar, that this is the source that you're trying to block from exiting the scar. So what is the logic behind this approach?
What you just said, I mean, that's maybe I just did not explain very well. We're trying to do homogenizing the scar, the fibrosis. That's what
In the
we're
entire
trying to do.
scar region.
The entire scar region. If you look at the DCAF model, because that's what we learned, any green you leave behind is a problem. And honestly, that's why in Utah, per DSMB, we're not recruiting patients with DCAF2 because we are biased. We're not recruiting any patient, we're just the PI center, and we're trying to get this done. But because when we tried to publish DCAF1, and all our papers, we cut the conclusion, avoid ablating either 4s and 3s, and you say, no, you can't write this, you never studied them. So now we're trying with the approach to homogenize the scar and then find an approach to sell it to everybody, and that's what is tried to show here, is really not only encircling the scar, but try to ablate it as well and cover it. And that's a recommendation for DCAF2, is hoping to cover it, completely homogenize the scar. I mean, that's a cartoon showing these lesions, but that's what we're hoping to do. And then hoping we cover, every, we have flat.
So that's the hypothesis. The problem with homogenizing scar is that we don't know exactly on what scale the inhomogeneities are important. And so if they are very important at the level of gap junction coupling and cellular scale, then it's hard to see how this very gross approach can really eliminate
That's exactly.
But I don't know, I'm just...
No, that's exactly right. And then the question I just showed you today was progression of fibrosis. And that's why I'm excited to see what's the work with activation. What happens when we, and the vest can help us, the ECGI can help us understand this further, is what's happening to this tissue? That's the biggest science on AFib. And is AFib a point of, that's what we're seeing more and more, trying to figure this out. Is the AFib, when you have AFib, is it, you get the point of no return, are you done? It's like chest pain when you have chronic disease, you have a heart attack already. Is this similar thing going on, or just AFib a symptom, or does it mean as an endpoint that a sign that this guy will stroke and something else? But this is progressing. And when this starts impacting, and this is, I think, a model that your team should put together here, is that when this scar, this myopathy starts impacting this kind of tissue, and what's its role, what's interaction between the healthy tissue, and this something is unknown. With this study here, we're trying to use, really hoping, one hypothesis is that advanced fibrosis will not help you whatever you do with it. We have to do this study. There's some people believe that advanced fibrosis is great, you need to ablate it. I think if you are UTA3 and 4 and diffuse UTA3 or massive 4, you shouldn't really waste your time in that. That's what I think. So as we define this study to convince people, even if you treat it, it's not going to work. It's going to work with the early fibrotic changes patients only. And we put the PVI STAR-AF study helped us define this group for the business data, make it easier on us. Because cafe and lines, without any plan, and untargeted lesions doesn't make sense. I think that study showed it. So how we targeting fibrosis will have an advantage long-term follow-up, and hopefully showing people that 3 and 4, doesn't matter what you do with them, they're not going to work. So that's what we're hoping that DCAP, that's our focus in DCAP too, that we're trying to show. Not only homogenizing fibrosis, but not in everybody. It's what we can for the subgroup patients. But in UTA 3 and 4, that's why we have 1,000 patients in there, correct?
So how do you ablate the regions where the scars are not like in one region, but they're like far apart? Very small regions but far apart. How do you ablate them?
That's a good Islam question. We have to connect them. We don't leave, we ablate them, we connect them because we homogenize it. We don't want to make pathways in between. So we recommend in the protocol, in the study, for example, what we do, we connect this area. You don't want to leave area between them. That's a problem.
Also, are there any most frequent locations where you find these large patchy scars?
Yes. Posterior wall is a beautiful place for everything, seems like. And you can answer maybe the water is pushing this. There's a couple of hypotheses why we think posterior wall, but posterior wall, this area here, it seems very common for a lot of people. When you start seeing anterior wall area, then it's a good sign. You never see anterior wall when they look, so it's never happens in these patients.
Okay, any other? Oh, there's more. Yeah, please.
So I guess 2 or 3 questions. So one is sort of on a similar line. Like, do you see anything in the appendage? So talked about the sort of different anatomy. Do you ever see a sort of scar in the appendage? Because obviously there's some school of thought that isolating the appendage might be useful.
I don't believe in that, I must say. I really don't. I send it to a surgeon to take care of this. I don't believe I see the data, yes. But the consequences of this, I really think the appendage is there for a role. Maybe the surgeon will agree with me. Is there anything that's killing it? You better close it before put one of these devices.
But do you see scar in the appendage at all?
Yes, we see, and I showed some data on the people with massive persistent AFib, that they have some atrial appendage involvement. But UTA4 is all of them have appendage involvement. We don't like to see that. When you see that, it's usually a scary sign. So the shape, but also the involvement that's the paper in JC showed the compass formation contains a contrast in these patient population. When you have scarring there.
So you talked about the fibrosis part of things. There's a very nice paper from Mayo Clinic where the appendages were surgically excised during surgery. And you looked at the amyloid sort of deposition, amyloid staining under the microscopy. It seemed like a lot of patients had amyloid deposition, which was more diffuse sort of patches of amyloid deposition in the appendage, and that correlated a lot with some of the different fibrillation after names.
After surgery, have you read the study? No?
Yeah, I'm not sure what to make of that because it may just be a marker of what you've shown, which is because they didn't look at fibrosis anywhere else. So it may just be a marker of people that almost all those people may have been Utah stage 4 and they're going to be a high recurrence group. I mean, I personally think that the amount of fibrosis probably is a bad indication for any type of ablation. There may be, and what I'd like to do, and hopefully that you'll be a leader in that, in 5 to 10 years, we have a way to define the patient who shouldn't receive any intervention. I mean, that's really, because even with surgery, which is easily the most extreme intervention for AFib, we still have 1 in 5, and now at late follow-up at 5 to 10 years, maybe 1 in 4 patients recur. And it would be great to see, and when your substrate remodeling has reached an irreversible stage that nothing we're going to do, like you're saying, maybe defining those people with substrates beyond any, that you can use this hammer approach. So, I think it'd be interesting interesting, but, you know, I'd agree that people with a lot of fibrosis anyway are probably going to be a bad group. That interesting, you know, and I know you're starting to show it, and I don't believe all fibrosis is the same, and then we need to further define what makes the fibrosis really bad. You know, clearly, because we're interested, because rheumatic patients really have a lot of atrial, they have an atrial myopathy and a hugely thick atrium. Yet when we just have gotten our data, we've submitted it for publication, we've looked at over 100 patients with rheumatic disease and compared them to 100 patients with degenerative MR, and there doesn't appear to be that much difference, yet those are much, but I think it's also the type and pattern of fibrosis, which you're starting to see, but we still have a lot to learn about that.
Yeah.
And also, you know, when does it become irreversible? I mean, you know, the Australia group has shown that risk factor modification may reverse some fibrosis. And then I was wondering what you think of that. Have you seen patients who,
I mean, it's a,
just with risk factor modification, their MRI score, their Utah score changes?
everybody treats this patient in clinic. I mean, did you? You know, the work is very honorable work from Sanders, amazing work. And it's hard to believe that fibrosis is reversible unless it's inflammation. Unless you're looking at fat, epicardial fat is reversible. That's what we're looking for. And they're doing this with, we're inviting them, they're part of the CAFT, we're inviting them to just look at this patient perspective with MR. If you're looking at epicardial fat, and this is intercellular fat, and this is recovering, that's okay. But fibrosis, you never see a regression here unless it's, when we see regression, we start looking further, we repeat and see what's different, because it could be inflammation, could be something happening first scan, but you never see regression ever. In these patients, you see progression or no change. I don't know, and our patient user, believe me, we listen and help and train and do some sleep apnea, we define sleep apnea and CPAP for 6 months, and 1 year continue following them. I like this idea, that's why we get a lot of hype, because you're encouraging people to live healthier, that's always will win, it doesn't matter. Even if any day they show it, but they showed it. I really believe that data is based on epicardial fat recovery. It's the only thing that recovers, and it would show in mapping. I mean, epicardial fat, they show that it's epicardial, regardless of the voltages up there. I can't tell. I really can't.
You show that the shape of the left atrium is an important indicator, and I think those 4 shapes were the result of some mechanical analysis. Is there an intuitive explanation? What is the shape? What is the shape?
Intuitive explanation.
That's right. So why this shape is worse than that shape?
Yeah. So that's where the mapping comes to life, right? This is what we love to map these hearts with your ECGI, and this is what we mapped here and see what the activation signs. Forget the atrium first. I mean, Phil told me today that some patients have Bachman lungs activation, some don't. How it depends on the shape. You see, the atrium, if you look at it carefully, the wider the atrium is, the bulb atrium versus narrow atrium, the less recurrence, the higher recurrence. And we know this will play a role, right, in the mapping. So I would really like to map this then basically outside and see what's the difference. And obviously, this is novel. This is only 8 months old. So now we're collecting data, trying to map and see what's the difference between those. And this is before ablation shape right now. Now we're putting a great figure of how does the shape change after ablation, if it's happening. Does the shape change after, which we think it does change, right, because we wait too long. That's a new science in its own, I'm relating the shape after. That's why it's Utah 1, class 1, even better with it, because we change shape from A to B and what's the delta. So we're looking at this, but that's interesting from day one, that we can do something for those class 4. If you have class 4 and Utah 3, I would advise, that they can put in protocols so that they will understand, why do something.
Okay, I think this is a good point, because first of all, I hear that not all fibrosis are the same, and my thinking is also not all atrial fibrillation is the same. So, it's a complicated story. We're just trying to simplify it, and it's probably very patient-specific. So that's my reading of the situation. Anyway, next week we have another master of atrial fibrillation, Marrouche, coming from Ann Arbor, University of Michigan, and you're all invited, and Hakan will give us all the answers.
Thank you, guys.